Hey, greetings from the Carroll County line. During today's podcast, I'll try to answer a question that somebody raised after something I said last month. If you care to skip back to that thought-provoking episode, you'll find I was trying to explain some of the basic beliefs which seem to be common to almost all Christians, along with most decent people. Not that they're exclusive of each other. The question was why, or anybody else, thinks that treating each other with respect and dignity for following the golden rule originated with a religion. Isn't it just human nature to be nice? The golden rule, also known as the rule of reciprocity, suggests that we should treat each other the way we'd like to be treated. It's something as simple as offering a smile to a stranger when your eyes meet in a grocery store aisle, or it can be an act of extreme generosity and compassion, like the group of Kokomo volunteers who spent a Saturday over in Winchester helping to clean up storm damage. The question suggests that we're born with some inherent inclination to share and be nice, but actually just the opposite's true. Selfishness probably started as a survival instinct. If I give you my bread, I may not eat. It's not difficult to see how that could lead to a thinking that if I give you some of my bread, then I won't have as much. From there we develop a pride that I've got more bread than you and so I'm better than you. That's what we're born with: ego, pride, and selfishness. We're programmed to look out for number one. It's all about me. I got mine and you got to get your own. So if our human nature leans toward greed and selfishness, who's to say that it should be considered bad? What that boils down to is the basic difference between right and wrong, and how that understanding may lead us to the meaning of the universe. We've all heard people arguing. Sometimes it's funny. Mostly it makes everybody just uncomfortable. But no matter how it sounds, we can learn something significant from listening. You're likely to hear something like, "How would you like it if I did that to you?" Or "I was here first," or even, "It's your turn to pay for lunch." Everyday people say things like that, both the educated and the ignorant, children and adults alike, every day. What's interesting in almost any argument isn't that somebody's complaining about the other person's behavior. Instead, they seem to be suggesting a certain standard for behavior they expect the other person to recognize. You don't often hear somebody say, "To hell with your standards, your rules." No. They'll try to argue that their actions don't violate the standard at all. But if they did, there's a perfectly good reason for doing so. In 1964, according to David Brooks, who wrote an article for The Atlantic last month, 45% of Americans said that most people can be trusted. This was from a study by the American National Election Survey. Now, they're not asking that question today, but a University of Chicago survey asked the same question to Americans in 2022 and found that number is now only 25%. 73% of adults under 30 believe that most of the time people just look out for themselves, according to a 2019 Pew Research Center survey. 71% say that most people would try to take advantage of you if they got the chance. Why do you suppose so many younger people think everybody's out to screw them over? Often in an argument, it seems like both parties are mindful of some sort of law or rule concerning fair play, decent behavior, morality, or whatever you want to call it. But arguing is mostly an attempt to demonstrate that the other person's just wrong. Arguing makes no sense unless there has beforehand been some kind of agreement as to what constitutes right and wrong. The laws or rules about right and wrong used to be referred to as the laws of nature. Nowadays, when we think of the laws of nature, we think about gravity, the laws of motion, and so forth. Scientific laws that have been tested and affirmed. But back in the day, when people talked about the laws of nature, they included that just as any object is governed by the laws of gravitation, man is governed similarly by his own inherent law. But there's one significant difference between the law of nature and natural law. While we're all subject to the laws of gravity and have to fall down when we trip, we can choose whether we obey the law of human nature or not. Everybody is constantly subjected to a lot of laws, but there's only one which we can ignore and disregard. I can't ignore those physical laws that I share with my drinking glass or the squirrels outside my window, but the law that's unique to my human nature, the one law I don't share with squirrels or anything else, is the one I can disobey anytime I want. There are those among us who will want to argue that these laws regulating behavior don't have anything to do with religion. I've been told that different religions and civilizations have held very different and sometimes opposing moralities. But that's nonsense. Most sane people will agree that these Hamas people, who shouldn't be confused with real Muslims, by the way, were wrong last October when they savagely murdered more than 1,000 people and kidnapped 248 more. But how are we to know that murder and kidnapping are a bad thing if we don't have some appreciation for peace and other good things? Violence and bloodshed have become a way of life for some people, both in the Middle East and on the streets of Indianapolis, apparently. But everybody knows it's wrong. They may try to make excuses, but they know for sure it's a bad thing. If anybody'd bother to study the moral teachings of ancient cultures and religions, the Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, for example, it's remarkable how much alike they are. But you don't really have to do that. Just think about a country where people are applauded for betraying their friends and families or deserting companions when the going gets tough. A society where everybody's trying to get what they've got coming to them and the hell with everybody else. A culture like that's not going to last long. Cultures have taken somewhat different views on who deserves the most kindness, whether it's a person in someone's own family or their fellow countrymen or everybody and anybody. But they've always agreed, contrary to our selfish instincts, that we should never put ourselves first. Selfishness has never been something that's anybody's ever admired. Cultures have had different ideas, even laws about how many wives a man can have, but they've always agreed that you just can't have any woman you want. The funny thing about people who deny that there's an absolute right or wrong are the first ones to back away from their belief the moment the cards have turned against them. Someone might make a promise that you made, but if you do the same thing, they'll be whining that it's not fair. Let's look at Hamas again. Last October, they came into a neighboring country, screaming death to Israel. More than 1,400 civilians were killed. Israeli women and young girls were publicly raped and mutilated, and 248 people were kidnapped, taken back across the border and held for ransom. I suppose these Hamas people knew that rape and murder was wrong, but somehow felt justified in their actions. As you know, Israel's response was immediate and deadly. While artillery indiscriminately obliterated Hamas strongholds and fortifications throughout Gaza, troops moved in to destroy their enemy and recover the hostages. And, as the cards began to turn against them, while food and water were shut off and their cities pounded by Israeli artillery, Hamas started crying, "No fair," and begged the United States to make the Jews quit picking on them. The Hamas government in the Gaza Strip along the border of Israel exists by a treaty, a promise, a covenant, a contract. Now, apparently they don't think that the treaty is fair, so they're free to violate it. Haven't they just admitted, by having some sense of justice, that they understand the law of nature, that despite their murderous rampage, they do know something about right and wrong, about fairness? let's get away from murder and rape now and talk about more average people like you and me, if we can be considered so. It seems like we're all compelled to believe in a real right and wrong. There's always a right way and a wrong way of doing things, and we call it natural law. If we can agree on that, let me go a bit further to suggest that none of us are truly abiding by that law. If any of you are, and I can think of a few people who would come very close, I apologize. Feel free to listen to something else because nothing I'm about to say pertains to you. But as for everybody else, I hope you won't misunderstand what I'm about to say. I'm not preaching, and Lord knows I don't want to pretend to be better than thou. I'm only trying to draw attention to a fact. The fact that this year or next, this month, or most likely today, we've failed to practice the kind of behavior we expect from others. We all have our reasons. There was that time you broke a promise to the kids because you were exhausted. That tax question that always comes up this time of year. Or the time you drove past the old guy who was broke down along the road because you were late for church. We've all been there, me included. And if anybody would have called me out, I'm sure that I could come up with some half-baked excuse, some reason for not living up to what I knew was the right thing to do. The question at the moment isn't whether my excuses were in the least bit valid. The point is that my trying to make a defense for myself is evidence in itself that I understand right from wrong, that no matter how late I was for an appointment, I should have helped that guy in the broken down car. If I didn't believe in this decent behavior, why else would I be trying to find an excuse? The truth is, we believe in decency so much. We feel the rule of law pressing on us so much that we can't stand to admit to ourselves that we're breaking it. Because you'll notice, it's only for ourselves that we try to shift blame and cook up an explanation. We always have an excuse for screwing somebody. It's usually somebody else's fault. So anyway, this should be your takeaway from the last few minutes if you've been paying attention. First, that people all around the world have this peculiar idea as to how they should behave, how we should treat each other. We can't seem to ignore it. But second, despite the seemingly instinctual urge to do the right thing by each other, we often do just the opposite. These two facts form the foundation of all plain thinking about ourselves and our world. We generally know what we're supposed to do, but for some reason we do something else. The next time we're together, we'll try to figure out how we got hardwired into the golden rule, why so many young folks seem to think that nobody's following it, and how that helps us better understand our universe. See you next week.